Well, good morning, Mercy Church. It's good to be with you. I'm Pastor Mark from Fellowship Church, just around the corner in Burlington, and so wonderful to be in church with you and be able to worship with you and lift up the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And it's a wonderful privilege also to lead us in not only the Word, but also in the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. It's a wonderful, wonderful Lord's Day to be together. I'd like us to turn in our Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and I'd like to read the first 13 verses. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. It's a passage that I preached on. It's kind of a pretty unique passage for turning over of the new year. So when we entered into 2025, I preached this sermon and just adapted it for kind of halfway through the year now to think about how we're using our time and what God is doing. So let's read the first 13 verses of Ecclesiastes 3. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. Well, brothers and sisters, not too long ago, Fellowship Church had a young adults retreat up north a little bit, up by Balsam Lake. And some folks in our church have a cottage up there, and so we enjoyed just a weekend together with young adults and had a great time together. And it's a group that kind of knows each other, but we were sitting around the fire and always looking for ways to start conversations. So we were just looking on our phone and thinking of some great questions to get the conversation started. And one of those questions was, what period of history, if you had the opportunity to travel to, would you choose to travel to? And you can imagine there are all sorts of answers to that. If you could hop in a time machine and head back to the creation of the world, and someone suggested maybe the crucifixion, that's pretty intense and difficult. Maybe not. Maybe the resurrection. Maybe the empty tomb, when the angel came and rolled back the stone and Jesus rose from the dead. That probably would be number one. In terms of time periods you would love to go back to. We have this relationship with time, and we would love to kind of be able to bend time a little bit, to head into a black hole and maybe travel back in time to correct something that we did that we're not really proud of doing, and maybe have a do-over and do it better the next time. Or maybe we would love to kind of jump to the future and kind of jump to an event or the next stage in our life that we'd like to get to. Maybe retirement or beyond a sickness or whatever we might think would be the next great stage in life. Well, the preacher in Ecclesiastes is thinking in this passage and a number of other passages about time and what God is doing and how time seems to slip through our fingers. And there are times in which we feel like we have a real grasp on what's going on. And we feel like we're using our time wisely and things are working out kind of how we plan. And one of the great ways in which it's so wonderful to have Ecclesiastes in the Bible, because this is someone struggling with the times in which it's not very clear what God is doing. And it seems like there are periods where we seem to be wasting our time, and stuff happens, and all the time and effort we put into something, it doesn't quite come to fruition like we thought it might. And it's a wonderful book. It's a book for believers. It's a book for atheists. It's a book for wanderers. For those struggling with their faith, those who are just plain confused with life circumstances, those who are angry, those who are kind of searching out whether God is true or not. The preacher, the theologian, the philosopher guides us through a lot of life, and we're kind of in one section of that here in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We might think of Psalm 90, teach us to number our days that we might gain a heart of wisdom. And my theme, just very simply, is that God does make everything beautiful in its time. But it's a difficult, long journey sometimes to see that and to understand that, and eventually to completely experience that in God's good timing. So let's look first of all at the pattern of time, then the purpose of God's timing, and then thirdly, the pleasure in God's gifts and in God himself. So just briefly, the pattern of time in this passage, and this is, probably one of the most recognizable passages, even if you're not a longtime church member here. Maybe you're just a visitor for the first time here at Mercy. I don't know. I don't know most of you. But even if you came without a church or Bible background, you might know this passage. Someone was saying, I forget now who sang this. Who sang this song? The Byrds. Thank you very much. I was going to say the Beatles, but I knew it was not the Beatles. So they sang a song based on this passage, and it has a very contemporary feel to it too. I mean, it feels like whatever age you're in, this passage has come and meet you, and you could just sense, even if you're talking to somebody on the street or somebody you've never met, you kind of say, this kind of makes sense. Like, this speaks to our experience. And it's really a wonderful melodic kind of poem. There's an appeal to this for anyone who's just experiencing life, and it just kind of makes sense. Somebody said there's kind of like a melodic rhythm to it. Like, if you're more musical, there's a sense of kind of the ups and downs and the sideways of major and minor notes. I kind of thought right away that I'm no musical expert, but it's saying that life is more like jazz than like just like a hymn or something like that. Like, it's unpredictable. You don't exactly know where people are going to riff and what God is doing. And Ecclesiastes is kind of like that, and his meditation on time kind of gives us a sense of that. It's like he's sitting down across from us at Tim Hortons, just kind of saying life is really tough, and life is sometimes really good, and sometimes it's really, really difficult and really hard. And there's something about getting used to that's going to be helpful for your life and for following Jesus Christ. There's a time to be born and a time to die. For example, there's a time to break down and a time to build up. The description there is of actual buildings being destroyed to make way for new buildings. A relationship that sometimes has to end to make way for better relationships. A time to weep and a time to laugh. Sometimes we can go right from at the beginning of the week, from the a marriage feast right to a funeral, buns and coffee after a loved one dies, and that can happen the same week. I've seen it. It's a tough rhythm. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to write that email and a time to not send that email. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Best emails I ever wrote were the ones I never sent. For everything there is a season. Living life under the sun, as the preacher so often talks about, involves our ability and our embracing of the ups and downs and difficulties of life, those rhythms that we're caught up in. And I would say that the preacher would say that a big part of our living within that mess and that the unknowns of God's sovereignty is that we learn how to adjust our expectations and our vision and our plans to what God is doing, even when we can't fully understand what God is doing. That Christian life is, in many ways, a way of adjusting prayerfully to what the Spirit is doing and what God is doing in our lives and in this world. There's going to be rhythms that don't make much sense to us. There's going to be situations and events in our life that plumb look contradictory to what we thought God was doing, or what God seems to be contrary to what God has promised and what he said to his people in his word. God has given us time. He's given us these rhythms, these seasons, and we need to pray for wisdom to know how to adjust our lives for his glory and for our good, as they change, as they disappoint us, as they excite us, as they confuse us. So that's the pattern of time. Secondly, the purpose of God's timing. Well, you would say, well, what is that purpose? And there are times in which, wow, this seems clear. Like, I studied for this for 4 years, and then God called me to this job that fits perfectly with that, with that preparation. I mean, I studied economics at York University, and I quickly came to understand I hate economics. I finished it, but there were times in which I thought, what on earth am I doing studying economics? And when really I wanted just to go study Greek and Hebrew and Spanish and theology, and that's what I ended up doing, as you probably know at this point. But what gain is there in all of this, the preacher will say? We're not in control of our lives, and we would like to be in control of our lives. We would like to think that our idea of what is good for us and what is good for our future is better than God's omniscience, his knowledge of all things. There are going to be times in your life where you're going to wonder where not just a few months, but even sometimes a few years of your life went and what they were for. And there are going to be times in which we feel like we've worked and sweated, and we haven't gained anything. And then time just always seems to be running out. You feel like you're 16 and you got your life in front of you, and you've got plans and aspirations, and you got time to fulfill them, to knock off your whole bucket list. And then you reach 60. I'm not there yet. You didn't think that, did you? And you reach 60, and then you start to think the time is running out, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be enough time to finish what I thought I would be able to accomplish. And life has turned out very differently than where the Spirit seemed to be leading this journey. The money and possessions and reputation we spent years to accomplish and to build up can crash and burn. We don't set the time of our lives when we're born, and neither when we're going to die. I remember reading or listening to a podcast on scientists trying to extend life, and the thought that maybe we'll be able to extend life, back to, the days of Moses or whatever, 120 years, and that's really actually possible. But also talked about just the fact that we can't really predict, even with all of our knowledge, all of our science, all of our technology. There's a lot of symptoms you can look for what might be a sign that a heart attack is coming, but 70% of heart attacks end up happening silently without any warning. 70%. Our time does not seem to be within our grasp. And there's no solution to that. Man has never found a solution. Got out of Florida and they searched for the fountain of life, right? And they never found it. There's no way to gain control. And those who try to find themselves frustrated. I can't just say that I want the dancing seasons in my life. Would like to, but God has not promised just dancing seasons. We can't say I want the losing to stop or I want to start winning this year, because that might not be what God has purposed. Wisdom says that there is, though, a purpose in the frustration, in the mess of life, and the rhythm of these seasons. When we turn to God, we see that he has made and will make everything beautiful in its time. Like, not my time, not your time, but in its time, according to his wisdom and his sovereign plan. God will ultimately make things beautiful. beauty even from the ashes of disappointment and trouble and loss. That might not seem easy to understand or to appreciate or to accept right now. But I think the preacher would say it is about adjusting our lives to God's purposes, to God's sovereignty, and even to God's loving care in our life because of his character and who he has shown himself to be. We need faith to recognize and lean into what God is doing. I often told our kids, when winter comes, you got to learn to lean into winter. Like, you can just kind of be scared and shocked when you open the door, but if you lean into it and you learn to enjoy stuff in winter, you can actually enjoy winter. It's true. And a lot of life is about leaning into what God is doing, prayerfully listening to the Spirit, listening to the Word, and leaning into what he is doing. And escape from our idolatry of having control over our lives. The preacher writes, he has put eternity into our hearts. We sense purpose, we sense design. We sense an all-encompassing plan. Even in the design of creation, there's a sign of one who has designed all things and made all things for a purpose. We need to find a place in our life we give control over to God, but not in a kind of a blind faith, but a dependence on who he is and who he has shown himself to be. Somebody used the example of imagine yourself to be, there's not a mural here, but imagine a big, huge mural, and you were able to be made really small, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids or whatever, and you were able to be in a little part of that mural. And you could have a magnifying glass. You can get to know a tiny little bit of that mural. But you would not be able to see the beauty of the entire painting from that perspective. And we find ourselves in that place very often. He's put eternity in our hearts, and there's a sense within us that we're going to have to wait for another world in order to see what God's plan is all about and how beautiful it is. And how his redemption plan is absolutely gorgeous and stupendous. It's going to blow us away. But right now, I have this magnifying glass on this one part, and I can't see the whole thing. And so it can be very frustrating. He writes, we cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. A lot of Ecclesiastes is the preacher getting comfortable with that and getting focused on what's the end of man? Fear God and keep his commandments. And this is where we're at. Moments of clarity. I'm in God's will. I'm feeling his pleasure and his presence. Like I can sense the Spirit's blessing what I'm doing right now. And there are times in which it feels like the Spirit is not even present. I'm not experiencing the wonder of who God is. I'm not experiencing any confidence in what tomorrow is going to bring. A marriage ends. Health goes in the toilet. Children rebel. Friends disappear. It's hard to pay just the rent. You feel alone and misunderstood in a crowded room after church, right? I've heard wonderful things about Mercy Lunch. We can't stay for lunch because we got to go back and pack up our stuff at Bronte Creek Provincial Park because we were camping there. But I've heard wonderful things about, great things about Mercy Lunch. But even there, you can feel lonely and in the middle of a crowded room. What is the purpose in God's timing? Ultimately, it is his Spirit transforming you to make yourself dependent on him, and he will do that. He will give you a sense of confidence in him rather than in life's circumstances. He's going to enable you, as difficult as it might be, to lean into his promises and his word and his Spirit and his plan to make you into the person he wants you to be, even though that can be very difficult transformation. He's going to, day by day, make you feel a little more deeply that God is in charge, that he is making everything beautiful in its time. Verse 14, so that people fear before him, so that you might feel the awe of who God is, the power that he is able to accomplish in your life. and feel and increasingly experience that he is beautiful, powerful, that his ways are not your ways, his thoughts are not your thoughts, and that's good. But he promises and will bring healing in the end. But in the meantime, there's not always going to be laughter. There will be planting and building up. There will be laughing, but there will also be tears and mourning and tearing down. There will be times of love, but also times of hate. And through that all, there will not be a time in which you're not under his protection and his loving care, his shepherding care. Derek Kidner wrote this about this passage. Instead of changelessness, there's something better. I mean, changelessness kind of sounds good. If you could just get to a peak in my life. But instead of changelessness, there's something better, he writes. A dynamic, divine purpose with its beginning and end. Instead of frozen perfection, there is the kaleidoscope movement of innumerable processes, each with its own character and its period of blossoming and ripening, beautiful in its time and contributing to the overall masterpiece, which is the work of one Creator. One of my favorite experiences is to listen to an old saint pray. And it's like an old, mature saint, and you can sense in her prayer what she has gone through. It's like the 90 years she's gone through, what God has done, the dancing and the crying that she's been through, and the way in which the Lord forged his plan for her through the fire, and the valleys and the mountaintops, and you can just feel that in her prayer. It's one of the greatest experiences in the church to hear an old saint pray. Well, I'm going to conclude by the pleasure in God's gifts, because the preacher once in a while does something very kind of shocking in his words, where he'll just conclude a matter by encouraging us basically to party and enjoy God. And it's always been surprising to me, and also been very, very encouraging. There's like this serious holy purpose to fear God and keep his commandments. That's the final word. This is what you should be doing. After all of this journey, all of this searching, all of this disappointment, all this confusion. But then he also says, in verse 12, basically, since you're not in control, learn to just enjoy God. Like, make that your purpose, to enjoy his gifts, but also to enjoy God through those gifts. I perceive there's nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. So it's not just enjoy, it's also to do good because you have been enjoying him so much. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. Lean into God, trust in him, adjust your expectations, your plans, based on what God is doing, but then also enjoy the gifts God has given you and the pleasures that he has put into your life as a gift from God himself. As a favorite pastor once said, God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. In him, finally, but also in his gifts. Well, I don't know if you were reading the news, but my Wall Street Journal app came up this morning, and the first line I read was, Iran's top diplomat plans a visit to consult with Putin. And that scared me to death for a minute. Iran's main diplomat is traveling, I don't know how they find out these things, traveling to meet with Putin, the president of Russia. It's like Russia, North Korea is fighting in Russia. Now Iran is calling out for help to Russia. This it might not end good. I don't know how this is going to end. The good news in all of the confusion of world events and your own personal events is that at the center of it all is a person who came through time and space and went into our skin and lived in our world and in this mess. The teacher says, Matthew 26, my time is at hand. Romans 5, verse 6, for while we were still weak, at just the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. God knows exactly what he's doing. He knows the right timing for everything. Galatians 4, when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law. And in the end, he's going to come back at just the right time And he's going to redeem this old, broken down world. And he's going to make it all beautiful in its time. And in a beauty that's going to astonish your hearts and keep you thinking and keep you celebrating for all of eternity. He's going to come down and say, behold, I'm making all things new. Come and see. Come further in and deeper in to see the greatness of what I'm going to accomplish. So savor your next meal. Trust in what God is doing. And trust yourself to Him. Lean into Him, even perhaps especially in the very difficult times of life. Take in and enjoy the beauty of your next hug or kiss from somebody that you love. Let your regrets be outmatched by the goodness of the gospel, the good news of God's love. Shake off the shame of your past sins and revel in what Christ has accomplished for you, not because of anything in you, but just because He loves you. Come to the table here this morning and rejoice in the finished work of Jesus Christ, in shedding His blood, giving up His body for sinners like you and me. Tell your anxious soul, your anxious heart and mind, that God will take the difficult times of your life and turn it to good and make it beautiful. No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. Let me pray with us. Thankful, dear Father, for having this book in our Bibles. We get pretty used to all of the narratives in which you are at work and the letters and the Gospels, but to have this book of